Thank you, SAP team and Elets for getting me here to talk about cloud because we also work with public sector organization. Most of the energy company are our members, SAIL is our member. We look at from the security, privacy, data ownership and related regulatory policy perspective. So uh, we all know the digitization is an important and there is a role that overall global economy plays into way the things are digitization happening basically. So the for digital economy, digital trade is important. So in 2027, almost $32 billion contribution of digital trade, which made to the overall economy, but which is going to be almost $5 billion in coming time. And we all know that India is a destination of technology. A lot of global companies are moving to India. Um, our own sector, as we have been hearing, is digitizing quite significantly. Every product and service now is thinking about how to bring or get it enriched with data. We are looking at IoT and cloud, and that is bringing quite an interesting kind of possibility for all of us. Uh, and we are making big bet on technology, emerging technology, as we hear that this decade for India is a, not decade, is a technology decade that we talk about. Uh, we also are creating good market for digital activities, e-health, e-commerce, e-learning, food delivery, and second largest market in the globe. And then we are serving digitally. Almost 2 million people come to India as a as a kind of a health tourism, and now we started serving them remotely. There are a lot of Indian company unicorns are going to the other global market. So overall, one of the key thing which we have seen in case of the India's digital economy is the digital public infrastructure and the way we transform and kind of thing that we try to do with respect to the digital payment that gives a testimony ki how the architectural intervention like a UPI can make a significant changes. And overall, we are talking about because of all of these things, our economy, digital economy will become 20% overall economy, which is a $1 trillion economy that we talk about basically. Right? So once we understand this digital economy and the kind of context that we are into, uh, we we try to, as a Data Security Council of India, try to understand digitization better. So these are technologies that we have been leveraging, and all of you have been talking about this technology. But the key thing is we are able to use those technology because of the protocol, standards, interfaces, and architecture framework which has evolved. But more importantly, cloud, which is making it easy for use these technologies basically. And we are taking this technology into plants, taking to the physical world as well, right? And when you are doing digitization, means we are largely talking about, and we heard in last panel, experience, productivity, and possibility. So we are improving the experience of our consumer. We are in a way enhancing the productivity, and more importantly, we are finding new possibilities out of it, basically, right? And then for that, every product and service is data enriched. We are designing for mobility. We are going for more open data ecosystem. We are bringing a lot of third-party players in the system. We are going for cloud. We are looking at more platforms to subscribe and working on the platforms. And eventually, we are also going for more event-driven, AI ML-driven kind of action. And as we see, we are also going for intent-driven computing, where programming is not required. You just use no code, low code platform to make the possibility happen for you. And then the pace of development and deployment. We are trying to squeeze the time that we can think and we can implement and we can make it possible basically. So this is what we see as a digitization ecosystem. But if you also talk about, we also talk about this is something would be happening in individual organization, but we also talk about digital economy. So digital economy is nothing but we are now learning and taking it to improve the public services better. We are trying to solve the goals of financial inclusion better. We are trying to make things more autonomous. We are trying to improve the productivity of the economy. We are trying to enhance the utilization of the economic asset. So all of these things we have been trying to do as the overall digital economy. So what is happening in individual sector is feeding back to the larger plan as a country we are making for digitizing the different aspects of the economy basically. And when all this is happening, and this is a kind of encapsulate that we develop to understand digitization, bottom of the understanding of digitization, what do we mean by digital economy? When all these things is happening basically, so uh, we are also now looking at what are those push which is coming. So you do digitization, one is your own requirement. Other is the digitization which is happening because the government also want you to work on that basically. So this is one interesting paper that we come across, and most of the oil energy members of DSCI, because of we follow the sector. So this is a kind of a digital roadmap which petroleum and natural gas industry has tried to put together. So it talks about how can you accelerate the acceleration. It talks about how can you fast track the field development. It talks about enhanced production and recovery. It talked about enhancing the entire health and safety kind of incident and preparedness for that. It talked about improve the productivity and reduce the cost and foster collaboration to make all of these things happen basically. So that's largely objectives of a energy sector, and these objectives if are achieved, the significant progress can be looked at from that perspective. So if you go for digitization, if you go for cloud, or if you go for digital ecosystem, so these are benefits it talks about. How can we reduce the cost and effort required for seismic and survey data interpretation basically? How can we improve the cost of or productivity of the engineer working on the field? How can we improve the or speed up the drilling operation basically? How can we reduce the cost of data transfer? How can we reduce basically the failure rate? Or can you predict the failures early basically? And for all of this particular government paper talk about this key thing. And this paper has tried to explore individual use cases, how the global peers in the energy sector have been leveraging the digital means and the, cloud computing to make all of this possible basically. So it talks about the cloud hosted exploration portfolio, full scale asset simulation on cloud based seismic data collection and interpretation, better communication and data sharing through cloud, and more importantly, the elasticity and scalability that cloud offer to the table basically. So this is one big push. It's not only the inherent requirement of individual organization, but it's also larger digital economy push that we see are coming on the companies and sectors that basically we observe as a DSS membership ecosystem. So this is an individual use case or industry use case basically, and from that the security comes in the discussion, and we try to address those problems and challenges because one of the key question when we talk about the digitization, we talk about data, and more importantly, we talk about the cloud, the security, the ownership of data, and now because of the Data Protection Act was passed, so that becomes a very important discussion, and sometimes that discussion also becomes a no-go kind of a go or no-go kind of a decisions basically. So let's try to understand. So what do we mean by security governance in the context of the cloud? So we know when we talk about cloud, we talk about different models. We believe that these models can be also, we can adopt the clouds, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, public cloud. Sometimes the adoptions can be cloud enable adoption. Sometimes it could be cloud-based adoption. Sometimes it could be cloud native adoption. Then we try to use cloud for different environments, whether development or production environment. We use it for deployment production environment as well. And then we try to bring the workload, different workloads on the cloud, right? It could be processing, it could be memory, storage, databases, application, APIs, container, platforms. So these are workloads basically we try to put on the cloud. And against these basically, there are some expectation in terms of the security, privacy, ownership, and more importantly from the compliance perspective. So that asks key thing basically. So the kind of principles that needs to be taken care of or thought about when we are talking about the cloud implementation and try to bring context of security, privacy, and compliance. One of the important thing it looks at is visibility. So do you have the visibility? The my data, my applications are going cloud. So do I get a visibility? So the loss of visibility is certainly one of the important part. How much that transparency I can obtain means how much I know what is happening with my data, my application basically. Can I still able to continue my operation? So disruption, some last session talked about this 99.7% kind of availability. So what about that basically? So can I achieve that discipline which is expected out of compliance requirement? Which compliance expect you to every transaction that you do should comply with the regulation rate. So can I do that with the cloud basically? Can I understand overall the approaches I'm doing orchestrated better for achieving my business goal on one hand, on the other hand, addressing the security, privacy concerns, and compliance requirements as well basically? Can I still align with my business basically? Can I implement my policies on a cloud environment basically. Some of these principles get in the discussion when we talk about security governance in the context of cloud. And then, and one of the key thing which you always get into the discussion in terms of the cloud, that you focus on ownership. You focus on your policy and procedure basically. You focus on the processes that you have. Can you emulate those processes in the cloud environment? You focus on the technologies. You focus on the configuration, because that's one of the important parts. Sometimes you may end up doing configuration which could probably jeopardize the security of your application or data basically. You focus on monitoring. You focus on assurance basically, right? So some of these requirements, because assurance is important, because you need to provide that assurance to compliance authority and bodies basically. And then because of that, I think some of the areas which get discussed in context of cloud is identity and access management. My user going there and they are creating identity and authentication part of that. My data, the application that I'm developing, the infrastructure security that I get out of it, basically vulnerability management that can happen, threat management, resiliency. Some of these focus areas, they are the one which get discussed and deliberated when we talk about the cloud security and governance. And on top of that, we know that there is a mighty Megaraj policy, which is being brought together to help government and public sector organization to adopt cloud better. There is also a national information security policy guidelines. So some of the oil, energy, power sector organization has to comply with this, because MHA has that kind of requirement, and sometimes it could create a problem for you in your cloud decision. Then there is a NCIPC, because if you're in critical sector, there is a NCIPC which is which is set up for security of the critical infrastructure, and their requirement also needs to be complied. And there are some sector regulators as well. If you are in a specific sector, the sector regulation, for example, if you are in power sector, there is a power sector security requirement which Ministry of Power has notified, which you need to comply with basically. So this is again a larger one slide encapsulate for you to understand the context of security governance in the cloud. And once we understand this, the what we see against this, right? So these are the requirements, these are the context, these are the obligations, these are the liabilities, these are the concerns, and sometimes care as well, right? So against it, the question comes in: are the cloud ecosystem, and especially the cloud providers and application providers, basically can help you browse all of this basically. And then we look at, so the maturity of the cloud, especially in last 5-6 years of time, has been significantly maturing. One is the standardization. So they bring a lot of effort to standardize the operations they do in terms of managing security, in terms of the ensuring the continuity disaster manager, in terms of the complying with the data security standards, codes of practices for the data protection directives that we talk about. Data protection, different regulations coming in. India also has now data protection act. So what kind of codes of practices you have, what kind of cloud security specific effort that you put together. So there are a lot of standard which has got evolved, and compliance with these standards and certifying this standard is something that we see cloud service provider have been doing quite significantly. On top of that, there are these cloud computing compliance control requirement, then cloud security alliance specific standards and practices, and you do assessment against that. And then there are some soft compliances also. So we see the mature CSPs, mature cloud platform providers had been really putting a lot of effort to make sure that they are complying diligently, and that benefit is available to each of you which are working. And we heard in last session that the burden of compliance is now shifting to the cloud provider, because they take care of most of the things that we need to do to comply with the regulation, right? So from the security perspective, if I were to really look at, so what I need to look at? So I need to look at the hygiene, basic hygiene, simple basic steps that I am taking care of. And sometimes that also becomes very difficult if you are managing infrastructure in-house basically, right? Because maintaining those patches, maintaining those updates, making sure that you are configuring better. So maintaining that hygiene is one of the important part. Second part is the managing the vulnerabilities and threat. So every day new vulnerability comes in. So are you equipped to manage the vulnerability? Are you equipped to close those vulnerability basically? Are you equipped to manage those threats? So there should become new threat, new virus, new payload come basically. Are you able to manage the infrastructure and network security? Are you equipped to really handle the challenges that we see at application level? Are you equipped to basically challenges that we see in identity authentication level? Are you equipped to manage the challenges that we see largely in data security, or largely the attention of attackers now is to getting hold of the data? And there are a lot of things, a lot of new attack vectors, a lot of new techniques being used for that basically. So are you equipped to do that? And being a provider which is providing all of this capability to global geographies, so cloud providers put a lot of effort in terms of improving and making it sure that they are improving day by day basically. So what they do, so they bring to the table, so apart from solving your business problem, they bring the operational excellence to the your security operations basically. The security required day to day kind of a day to day attention, and more importantly, because in security ecosystem that we see, and especially some of the organization that we look at, millions of things will go well, but there could be one thing which could create problem for you. And for that, you need to have very diligent operational excellence and effort for that. So they will bring the expertise and skill to make sure that your cloud operations are intact. The threat intel that they would have, because of the platform which has a footprint all across globe, is global in nature basically. And the whatever innovation technology upgrade required to make sure of our security. So that's the CSPs, the mature CSPs have been trying to really add value in this particular phase. So this maturity is now, one is their own inherent requirement, but more importantly, these questions that we have been asking for last 5-6 years of time, and that answer to those questions are now being reflected in the maturity that CSPs are showing in terms of the security, privacy, and the governance. So one important question which always come is ownership, and sometimes because of that we ask the question about the data center should be here, the location of the data should be here. But the ownership is now a very important question, and the ownership means what? If you try to understand that question and get the answer for that question, then probably location and the data where the data sits basically doesn't have much of the meaning basically. So we try to define that as well, and we have been working with different regulators basically. So to define the, what do you mean by ownership? That you have or your data basically. So one is that this data is not disclosed to anybody else. This is one of the key requirement, right? So if data is going from my organization to cloud environment, so one of the assurance that you should have that this data is not getting disclosed to anybody else, right? Secondly, there should be very, I struggle in my environment to make ensure the hygiene, but if I'm going for cloud, so all the underlying infrastructure, all the applications, so they are patched well, they are updated well, they are taking care of those hygiene requirement day to day very well. So that's the one of the key thing that you expect when your data is going there, because your data going there and there is problem with underlying infrastructure, your data is at compromise basically. So there's assurance on that. Second part is the one is the hygiene, but other is the, as per my requirement, can I add more layers of security basically. So that's the one of the important thing from the data perspective, right? Then I have a lot of compliance requirement. I need to retain data for 7 years because of regulation. I need to make data available for some reasons for the compliance requirement or regulatory requirement basically. So can I get assurance that any point in time my data, and we heard in last session about the portability of data, you can get data from this platform to other platform. So can I have that assurance from cloud provider that my data retention requirements are fulfilled by the cloud provider basically. Second is the assurance and availability of data at a very high level of, so at any point in time, so my operations and my data, it should be available to me, right? Then another important part is that nobody else than authorized people in my organization and externally is accessing the data basically. So that assurance is there. And then more importantly, if any breach happens, I have get prompt notification basically. So these requirements, if they get fulfilled, you may have data center here in India, but if they don't get these kind of requirements doesn't get fulfilled, then there is no meaning of ownership of data basically, right? And on top of that, there are some other requirements as well basically. So that my so when I'm talking about my own data basically, right? So there should be some clear indication, some clear kind of assurances or legal interpretation to tell me that these data that I own as an as a my data owner basically. So how can you make that possible basically? Then second part is that anybody which is owning data, they should be able to exercise all the right associated with data basically, right? Then you should get a full control of data by very simple and effective means. It's not very complex in terms of taking control of your data basically. And third important part is that you allow choices with respect to data use and storage basically. So if ownership means this, then where it looks at or where it stays or where it is stored doesn't really matter much. But there is a good answer to each of these questions is given to you, then probably the requirement of data center here or some other places. And that's a reality that we have tried to see in case of this DPDP Act. So when we started in 2017-18, so we talked about localization of some data. But this reality of digitization, it has now got factor in the Data Protection Act, which removed the condition of localization in this particular act basically. Because the technology is giving that assurance to you, and the maturity of the CSP level is giving that assurance to you. So once we come to term with this, uh, one of the important thing which I would probably like to conclude in this slide is most of the discussion deliberation I hear about is a is a public sector data center, right? There is a Meghraj policy of government of India, or for that one, there's a common government cloud that we talk about. But some of those initiatives that we see as of now are mostly the infrastructure as a service, right? Here you're just buying the infrastructure, but application you have to take care of their own basically. What you require for the digitization is the capabilities. You require platform or SaaS capabilities basically, right? Those capabilities we are just talked about last session, that AI, ML, some of those kind of capabilities which is available basically. So that distinction we should be able to do it. So we have a very generic understanding when we talk about the government cloud or probably public cloud or government cloud. So most of those things are largely related to the infrastructure as a service, not a platform as a service or software as a service basically. And these capabilities are very important basically, right? So because digitization, significant part of digitization is not infrastructure, is your ability to get hold of those capabilities required to put together those plans basically, right? So ability of consuming the capabilities critical for digitization is one of the key part of your digitization plan. Second is we know that platform brings that agility, right? It brings that standardization, scalability, seamless experience as well. And we heard in last another panels as well how these elements are they matters a lot basically. They don't come with the infrastructure, no? They come with the platform, they come with the software basically, right? Then we talk about the capabilities also comes with the global expertise, because some of the analytical skills that may not be available locally here, right? And there are a lot of analytics which is happening all across globe. And that paper that I just mentioned about the Ministry of Power, there's so many use cases that paper talk about in Shell what is happening, Indonesia what happened. So all of those analytical skill that you get to know or get to use basically when you are working with respect to the PaaS and SaaS services basically. And more importantly, the key part of the globalization is the faster the collaboration, faster this more intermediation, right? And faster the manageability and innovation basically. So these are not the infrastructure as a service. These are platform as a service or SaaS as a service basically. Now analytics as a service also coming on top of it basically, right? So this distinction is very important. So one of the key thing which I will leave it with my presentation is the architecture strategy that guarantees you leveraging global capabilities while providing the high level of assurance basically and allowing ownership is the critical for the security success part of the digitization innovation. And that is very important. And at a very different policy level, including this national information security policy guidance, plus the mighty Megraj policy, plus the sector level, all the sectors are talking about this policy. We are trying to drive these measures together that capabilities niched. Why Globe is using India's capability, right? So they're almost $250 billion IT industry we have, right? Because they are leveraging capabilities, right? We may be leveraging the infrastructure basically, but they are leveraging our capability. And more we are able to leverage this capability, more we'll be able to make those digitization plus real basically. So with this, I would like to conclude my talk here, message here, leaving with this slide. Thank you very much.
Sir, any question from the audience? So can I ask one question?
Yeah, yeah.
So no, this has been coming to us from our customer. Uh, so SAP has something which is there in the India data center and some of the analytics part which is there outside India. So when the views are going outside India and the calculation and everything is happening outside, and but the actual data is residing in the India, will this fall into the data privacy or data protection bill? Or
The data protection bill uh, done very great thing for all of us is it removed the localization requirement altogether, right? Only one condition it has is does talk about government will notify the blacklisted countries where there will be some restriction in terms of uh, moving the data basically, right? Otherwise, every country which is not in the list basically, you can move the data basically. Most of the countries that you will be doing analytics will fall into the white those not blacklisted list basically. So that is not a big problem from the DPDP Act. There's some regulation like a some RBI or some SEBI or some other regulation which does talk about it. And one of the regulation of RBI allow you to get data out, do the processing, and again bring back and have the copy here basically. Yes. So regulator also are very practical, at least in RBI case we see. But sometimes regulators ask you to use the government empanel CSPs, so that becomes difficult, right? Because those CSPs are largely infrastructure as service. Amazon, Cloud, Microsoft. So such CSPs are largely in production. They do have application, but the business application like SAP or many other application, so they don't fall into the infrastructure as service. And the current implementation process is largely meant for the infrastructure as service, not for the platform or SaaS as a service, basically.
So can we take one thing that if our application is getting deployed on a MITI certified data center with any of the
that's
CSP,
the
then we are meeting the regulation?
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, sir.